Skole ngambulo luku. With whatever we do. Jioni safu nola. With whatever we do. Hale yidemu new school. Nyepamne nekulukula. Nyepangiragala gena. Nyepamne nekulukula. Ibuloke nongoto ni beti sola. Ibuloke da toto.
Mingi Congo.
Lamin.
Na?
Lamin te jibe norin te nyamen Lamin.
Kabona wulo kono.
Wulo kono nyinta mo Lamin.
Pabilenki.
Muna ngata afongole.
Haina.
Ngata. Ngoto le. Fabrama.
Mingi. Baba nyola.
Ngoto le Fabrama.
Namu jumara kuma diteng.
Fabrama.
Jumara mu.
Ndele bare muso.
Nunda mana.
Kamo kata.
Jamani mbere.
Alindo ko.
Jamani.
Bari ngoto man kontande.
Bari jamani fana na mundu ma man kontan.
Ngoto minaka ngala min je fon filitala. Lamin jibe nori nyala.
Lamin ila siran sama ne benki. Yala so tol sayni no ko ngol ko momo.
Ngoto.
Nam.
Itedinte yalo ne Lamin hakilo diata bake karamungoto. Anu santeng ministry ko di ngole si suwo ko amanke ko do holiday
si bitun
Bagona ringa.
ala ni ko kede namo balo
ala ni na ko na karta bulo be dam ala ni je
ngoto
nam
ngoto mon kontan fere
jamani mu ne keda
ife ka Lamin ki wulo ko no nyintay mon ko do fete malo Lamin nyanta sila la be la moy kala karango
jamani karamol be soron ne ko fasita wulo ko nako
karamol ma soron ni ko karamol soron da amanke comme holiday lem ngoto dini ngo nyanta sila la ala karango la moy yamen kaben fue man kontan andamande
alla nyin kombo courant adan dal kombo len to la jankara mol soron da doro kabe courant ma daro lo kombo e don dol fana na kara mol soron je kara mol soron Lamin ada lo nyino la man tara fe na sokon ala mu nekela
am Lamin ite fete malon ko lesinol be ke kar radio to
Nga fine.
e ko nyani mo Lamin ya mu na fonye
kabe mina kan tambita nteri maning Fatu tambite la sukala ala diningol bebe siri be la moyka
Faru danso am fana tambita jele ni subala la ngaje diningol be jet talanta nen kili warol be serin jelen
sa Lamin fanante ku kili wo ke no la ba Lamin bitaka wulo ko no nyinta mo Lamin
aman dara fenela
ite dine ko di man si yakari la suno la moy radio to balon na
mu ne ka ke afonde ba nyara ni alon
telentel jikot
afonde ba mu de be ke
ite balon tel be jikritel ni man karambe ku kele yaje nata karana mbasa malaya ay tarije
par ñarande kombo courant ho findira kombo ide na raje den sonka bay ko Lamin manya tala wulo ko karam mo be so da fa ñembe
ko to wole nati bayo ngalle ni Lamin kuntala kombo courant o ka fa me kombo courant asototal wala kinay ko e si suwo kono bari ni ko e si suwo kono be karangol di ke la radio lin telel to hani tele masoto to nyaay man tele soto la bungo bar radio be bulen koto batiri sanga ay si ay alamo
sa do kala
nyaadi ko ta o bulaji
ado kala nyaadi
kamun ke nyaadi
radio abe wala mo la be mona falaje
ibe la karandirol kala jele
ti talle be radio ko men ka karandirol
ila subjector baby jele baby jele
wala nan ka coco moy fa dan so wolya ngom metambi ka nga dinni wolje be ikadum bungo ko kada farmo
a sototal de
Lamin mala be kara wala de
bari
laftalal ideal on ko inde every year second wala fourth
muna ni ko di ha ko nde ko folle sinila mba nde le sinlo ne ba
mba foke en koto wole fango yen wulindi yalo famo keta bat ñu fana bulata ko ko me yen nati jambi Lamin nyanta karana ndel be jiko be nyine ka ya bulay kara wulo kana ta kilar ya bambalo yo be bulaje koto dinni ngoy si ayala le sino la moy radio
wara ka munda kara mo man soro Lamin nyanta kara si so na regular
sila le ayala le sino
ndale ko korna ko smalo
kilar ya
be ngala ko momo sa mi do ni ko no kera
mengi bruze
ndale ko la da ba rosa no radio ba no bari woro radio ni abe jele ba ngam do man dembe buljan dala nyara nyar wo ko fendi mo la Lamin tayra ba rosa
bara te ku folo ajibe nori nya Lamin tamete ku
teku
bari ko do famo ke
ja image nañu ñambol si zol le keje kisgi man si zol no le kafun ka ñowa bari ñambu kino ñi mañana ka finde ni nambe ko do la ga
ngalle limbeta de be ñambo do dilanna
ñara nim ko ridin fennat ñara nata
bari famo ke da
ngata bungono tammi bungono ñara mel ngando ko fele ko ke bar nganda ni pelo la ndija
iyo awa
la bungono bismillah bisu diara
pendulala ye fongo tanka sina dolu tanka koro ta koro
Hi everyone, we're here again today and my name is Mr. Quraish. Today our topic is forces and energy. What is a force? A force is simply a push or pull or twist that is exerted on an object, and we need to know what forces can do. One is to start an object moving or to get it to speed up. Another is to stop an object that is moving or to slow it down. And forces can also change the direction of movement of an object. So we need to remember these points. Start something moving or speed it up. Slow something that is already moving or stop it moving. And change the direction of movement of an object. Forces can be classified as a contact force and non-contact force. Now, contact force exists when two objects are touching or they are in contact. And examples of that include friction, applied force, air resistance. Non-contact means the objects are not in contact, they are at a distance, but yet force exists between them. And examples there include gravity, magnetic force, electric force. Take a look at this photo and you can see examples, like when you're pushing something or when you're pulling something, there's contact between you and the object you're pulling. When a ball is moving on the floor, for example, or through the air, there's contact between the ball and the air. So there's friction there. You can also see for non-contact force, example given there is gravity. With gravity, the object is attracted to the earth and there is nothing linking the two. Another example of non-contact force, you can look on the right, you'll see magnets and you can see the force that is between the magnets. So those are examples of contact forces and non-contact forces. So here is something for us to look at. Let's take a look at the photo and let's start from the top left. Now, what type of force do you think the guy with the wheelbarrow is a pushing or is a pulling? Want to identify whether it's a push or a pull. These are simply forces. Okay, so the first one, what do you think? And that should be a push. And when you go to the second one, you can see a lady moving a vehicle in which you have a baby. So push is when you're moving something away from you, and pull is when you're moving something towards you. So take a good look at the photo, and wherever you see somebody moving something towards him or herself, that is a pull. And when somebody is moving something away from him or herself, that is a push. We measure force using a spring balance, and it is measured in the units we call the Newton. So force is measured in newtons. The size or the magnitude of a force can be calculated by multiplying the mass of an object by the speed of its acceleration. So simply we have force equals mass times acceleration, or force equals ma. For example, weight is a force, and the weight of an object is dependent upon the weight or upon the mass of the object. The pull of gravity causes an object to accelerate downwards at the rate of approximately 10 meters per second, or simply 10 meters per second square. So weight equals mass times acceleration due to gravity, or simply W equals mg. So an object of mass, example, of 1 kilogram will therefore have a weight of 10 newtons on Earth. So let's try this problem here. Find the weight of a 60 kilogram boy, given that g, that is acceleration due to gravity, is 10. All right, I'll give you a few seconds to work that out. And 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's see. Simply, you will have to use the formula W equals mg. Now, m is the mass, that is 60, and g is 10. So 60 times 10, that simply gives you 600. And don't forget the unit. We said force is measured in newtons. So the unit there should be 600 newtons. Now, also we can classify forces as balanced and unbalanced forces. Now, forces can be balanced or unbalanced. If the forces are unbalanced, they can change the shape of objects and they can change the way the objects are moving. Moments are turning forces. Next lesson we'll be looking at that and we'll say more about that. Take a good look at this photo. Arm wrestling is a common sport, and you can see at this point we can refer to the forces of the two men as balanced forces because nobody is able to lay down the arm of the other person. Unbalanced forces, on the other hand, occur when the two forces acting on an object are not of equal sizes. If we look at the photo, you can see a big child and a smaller child. So obviously, the forces are not going to be balanced, or we say they are unbalanced, they are not equal. The overall force acting on the object is called the resultant force. If the forces are balanced, the resultant force is going to be 0. If they are not balanced, the resultant force is not going to be 0. Example, take a look at the picture on the right. We can see a 60 Newton and a 30 Newton both applied to a vehicle. So there, what is the resultant force? Resultant force, you add up the forces. So we have 60 plus 90, 60 plus 30, that gives us 90. The second one gives us, now you can see one force pulling the object on the left, the other force pulling the object on the right. So that gives us, you have to add the two. Normally, the force going on the right is considered positive, so we say that is plus 30. The one on the left is negative, so that will be negative 10. So negative 10 and the positive 30 will give us 20. So we say 20 to the right because the 30 is the bigger force, so the object is going to move on the right. If the forces on an object are unbalanced, this is what happens. One, if the object is stationary, it is going to start moving in the direction of the resultant force. Remember, the resultant force is the sum or the total you get when you add up the two forces. Number two, a moving object changes speed or direction in the direction of the resultant force. So it's like, again, whichever of the two forces are bigger, that is where the object is going to move or turn in the direction. In the example that we'll show on the next slide, the resultant force is simply the difference between the two forces. So take a look at the photo. You can see a vehicle with unbalanced forces. What are these forces? The engine of the vehicle is trying to move the vehicle on the right, and the force of the vehicle is 100 Newton. Now, other forces are trying to pull or stop the movement of the vehicle. In this case, friction. So it's the one that is trying to drag or stop the vehicle. So the direction of that force is 60 Newtons. So overall, if you go to the top, we can see the one going to the right is the positive force. So that will be 100 minus the one that is on the left, that is 60. So 100 minus 60 will give us 40 Newtons to the right. Let's take note, it's not always that the force on the right is positive, because if this vehicle we are moving towards the left, then the positive force is going to be the 100 Newton, and the opposing force or the frictional force is the one that is going to be the 60 Newtons. So the truck eventually speeds up in the direction of the resultant force. That is, if you put 160 together, or 100 minus 60, which is 40, so the resultant force is 40 Newtons to the right. So the change in motion of an object depends on the size of the resultant force and the direction of the resultant force. These are two important something. So for any object to either move or stop or change direction and so on, one, how much force is applied to it, and the sum of the resultant force will tell us which direction it is going to move. So the greater the resultant force, the greater the change in the motion of the object. Whether a moving object speeds up or slows down depends on the direction of the resultant force. So one, the object speeds up if the resultant force acts in the direction of movement. For example, if you're climbing a hill and the resultant force is positive, that vehicle is going, or the object is going to move and climb over that hill. The object slows down if the resultant force acts opposite to the direction of movement. Again, using the example of somebody climbing a hill. If the force that is pulling you down is greater than the force you are using to go up, obviously you'll see that object or vehicle or person either slowing down or coming down. We might have experienced this. You want to say you are jogging or you're running, and when you approach a hill, you'll see your speed going down. Or let's say you're riding a bike. The moment you approach a hill, your speed changes. But if you're going downhill, you realize your speed is going to be increased because there is less force opposing your movement, or less force pulling you back. So we come to types of forces. Basically, at this level, we look at three: gravitational force, magnetic force, and frictional force. And we're going to look at each of them and say one or two things about them. Let's start with gravitational force. It says, one, the property of the earth to pull all objects towards it is what we refer to as gravitational force. Objects that are raised above the earth's surface will eventually fall back to it because of gravitational force. Gravitational force is the force that keeps the earth and other planets in the orbit around the sun. And the earth, number 4, has its own gravitational force. And if there were no gravitational force, all of us will be floating in the space. You just can't come down. And gravity also keeps our satellite, example the moon, revolving in its orbit around the earth. Of course, there are artificial satellites as well around the earth. They are able to maintain their orbit because of gravity. The force between you and the earth, we refer to it as your weight. We've looked at that before. Example, if the force of gravitational force between you and the earth is 600 Newton, we simply refer to that as your weight. So these are a few attributes of gravitational force. And let's go to the next one, which is magnetic force. Now, some materials contain a substance that is called magnetite. This substance has a special property that causes the material to attract certain metals. Such materials are said to be magnetic, and the pulling force exerted by them is called magnetism. So naturally occurring magnet material is one that is called lodestone, and it is a form of iron ore. So in fact, most common magnets we find around, they are iron, and some are naturally occurring, others we say they are induced, they are made to have the magnetic property. We have two types, like the bar magnet. These are permanent magnets. They don't lose the magnetic property. But there are others that we sort of artificially create, or we induce the magnetic property in them. This is something we can even try at home. All you need is a battery. You have a piece of wire, and you find some pins. So you can see you have to coil the wire around the piece of nail, and once you connect the ends or the terminals to the battery, and you bring the nail closer to some lightweight pins, you'll see them picking them up. So sometimes we need to familiarize ourselves with. One is magnetic pole. It's simply referring to one of the two ends of the magnet where the magnetism seems to be concentrated. So we have the north-seeking pole. From the word seeking, it means finding, okay? So it's the pole of the magnet that points towards the north when the magnet is suspended freely, when it is not lying there, it's suspended freely. It's also known as the positive magnetic pole, or you simply can just say the positive pole. The counterpart is the south-seeking pole. That's the one that points towards the south when the magnet is suspended freely. It's also known as the negative pole, or you can simply say negative magnetic pole. The area around the magnet where its force can be felt is called the magnetic field. Now this is a bar magnet, and those are iron filings or pieces. So when you bring the magnet, say you spread the pieces of iron filings on a piece of paper. If you just bring the magnet and you move it around, you'll see this pattern that is formed. So you can see it shows you the area where the force of the magnet can have some effect. So don't forget the area around a magnetic or around a magnet where its force can be felt is the magnetic field. So magnets have very important uses. We use them every day, sometimes in attracting or lifting iron and steel. If you take a look at the picture on the left, there's a junkyard where they throw all sorts of waste metals and things. So nowadays we realize we need to recycle metals, particularly iron. So you can simply bring a powerful electromagnet which can simply be switched on, and then it attracts all the metal, and where they want to put them, once they set the position, then they'll just switch off the system, and then the iron or the metals will be released. So don't forget, like I mentioned, a bar magnet never loses its magnetism, and is therefore called a permanent magnet. But the electromagnet is temporary. It only attracts when there is electricity. When the switch is off, they don't do any more work. Friction is another force we mentioned. It's the force that resists or opposes the movement of two surfaces that are in contact with one another. Friction resists the rubbing movement, and the energy is given off as heat. This is why we have machines getting hot when they're working. So what happens when we rub our hands, for example? If you rub your hands on a cold morning, what do you experience? So frictional forces, what happens is when an object moves against another object, frictional forces are created. These forces act in the opposite direction to the movement. So friction simply makes it more difficult for objects to move. If you, for example, want to move your hands in the air, it's very simple. But if the moment they come in contact and you want to move them, you'll see it becomes difficult because there's friction. So that is some information about frictional force. Friction can be very helpful. It can be very useful. For example, friction between our shoes and the floor stops us from sleeping. Friction between the tires and the road stops cars from skidding. And friction between the brakes and wheel help bikes and cars to slow down. So if you need to move, you need friction, and you need to slow down, you need friction. Imagine if a car is moving on a wet, slippery road and there is less friction, what is going to happen is that if the car wants to brake or stop, the car is going to skid, and that can cause or create accidents. If we're in the bathroom and the tile is all wet and slippery with the soap water that is around the floor, you will notice if you're not careful, you can easily fall because there is less or no friction between the foot, the sole of your foot and the floor, so things easily move against each other. And frictional forces, we say, are much smaller on smooth surfaces than on rough surfaces. The example I gave you, smooth tile, the friction there is less, but concrete or rough floor, the friction is much higher. Friction can also be unhelpful. It's not good in the sense it causes us to need to lubricate our machines. For example, your bike, you need to add oil. If you don't, the friction in the chain and the axle is going to increase. That makes it very difficult for you to pedal your bike, and your bike becomes very noisy. And when there is a lot of friction between moving parts, a lot of energy is wasted or transferred to the surroundings, and that causes a lot of heat. Again, like I said, think of what happens when you rub your hands together. It's because of friction that your hands feel warm. And air resistance is also friction, so it affects bikes, cars, and any other moving object, aeroplanes, and so on. They experience air resistance. It is caused by the frictional forces of the air against the moving vehicle. So the faster the vehicle moves, the bigger the air resistance. If you have been running during the sport for your school, for example, you might have experienced this, that as soon as you increase your speed, you feel like the wind is trying to stop you. The top speed of a vehicle or an object is reached when the force from the cyclist or whatever is moving is balanced by the air resistance. So as you increase your force, the air resistance increases. So the highest speed you can maintain is reached when your speed and that of the air resistance become equal. So since we say it's a nuisance or it's something that is disturbing us, what can we do to reduce friction? One, it says we use ball bearings or wheels. If you look at the picture on the right, bottom right, that's a sample of a ball bearing. You have them in many moving parts of bikes, cars, and other machines. It makes it easier for the parts to move because there will be less rubbing, rather is the balls that are rolling. If you look at the picture at the bottom, it's like if you want to move, for example, a heavy table, it's going to be very difficult, but if you have some balls or something that can roll, it becomes easier. So that is one way we can reduce friction. A second way is to use lubricants like oil and grease or carbon. That this will make it easier for the moving parts to move and there will be less or little friction. We can use highly polished surfaces. If you have things that must touch and they are going to work together and move, if you polish them and their surfaces are smooth, it makes moving easier and it reduces the friction. Another way is to do streamlining because that reduces air resistance. Cyclists, especially those who are in the competitive sporting, you'll see they will go down so that there is less of the air reaching them, and even the entire dress and the helmet they wear, everything is so designed so that there will be very little air resistance that is going to impede or reduce their speed. Even modern vehicles are now streamlined. They're shaped in such a way that air easily flows over them. So the good thing about that is that it allows them to travel further and at a higher speed using the same amount of fuel. Compared to if a vehicle is not so designed, then that vehicle might end up using a lot of fuel. Next, we want to look at energy, which is simply the ability to do work. So anything that is able to do work, we said, is energy. And the types are simply potential, example, chemical, nuclear, and so on, and kinetic, heat or sound, and so on. So simply the types are two: potential energy, kinetic energy. Potential energy is the energy of an object by virtue of its position or condition. So what do we mean? If I should raise something from the floor to a height, it's going to have potential energy. What do we mean by condition? If you strain something, like if you have a stick and you bend it, you're straining it, so you've changed its condition. Or if you have an elastic something and you stretch it, you're giving it potential energy. Kinetic energy, anything in motion, anything that is moving is having kinetic energy. Potential energy comes in forms that are stored. Chemical, gravitational, nuclear, these are all examples of potential energy. Whereas kinetic energy, things that are doing work, electrical, heat, light, motion, sound, these are all examples of kinetic energy. So the difference between the two, this is very important, is that potential energy can be stored. Kinetic energy is already moving and doing work, so therefore it cannot be stored. Once it is stored, it becomes potential energy. So we have a bunch of different forms of energy. So don't forget, once again, kinetic and potential are the types. But this can be changed or transformed into different forms. So here in the chart, we have the energy split into kinetic and potential energy. And among the kinetic, you can see thermal or heat energy. We have mechanical energy, electrical energy, and magnetic energy. And when you come to potential energy, we have chemical energy, elastic energy. When you stretch like elastic or sticks, they have elastic energy, nuclear energy, and gravitational energy. Sound and light can fit into both of them. So These are different forms of energy. And to help you remember them, just go with the acronym MELT, so that you can remember some of the forms of energy in case you're required to name them. So you have M for mechanical energy, E for electrical energy, L for light energy, T for thermal energy or heat energy, and S for sound energy. Of course, there are the other forms, but just to help you in case you are required to name some forms of energy, just write MELT, and that should help you get the names. So here we have some homework for you. 1, a textbook weighs 2.2 kilograms. What is its weight? Number 2, find your sister's weight if her mass is 45 kilograms. 3, your school bag weighs 80 newtons. Find the mass of your school bag. Now you can use the triangle or formula that is given on the top right there, W divided by mg. So it's simply m equals W over g. The W is the weight, m is mass, and g is gravity, force of gravity, which is giving us 10. So if you need anyone, just cover it and then you'll get a formula. For example, if we cover m, then we have W over g. So m equals W over g and so on. Number 4, a book weighs 56 Newton on the moon. If the mass of the book is 35 kg, find the moon's gravity. Number 5, you're to name the 2 different types of forces. And number 6, here are some sentences with blanks, so you copy and fill in the blanks. Dash is a force which occurs when objects are in contact with one another. Some substances, such as oil, reduce the force and are called blank. Smooth surfaces usually have low blank, and rough surfaces have high blank, so you to fill in those spaces. Number 7, which force holds us down to the surface of the earth? Number 8, describe 3 effects of gravity. 9, copy and complete the following. The end of a bar magnet that points north is called the blank. B, when a south-seeking pole of a bar magnet faces north-seeking pole, the 2 are blank. C, the magnetic force of a bar magnet can be seen when iron filings are used. This is called a blank. That's all for today. Please, when you do your homework, you can send it to Gambia Education TV. I think they have an email there, and they'll get your homework onto me so that me and my colleagues can look at it. Have a good day. That's all for today. Again, my name is Mr. Quraish. Thank you very much.